President Biden this week with NATO. There's plenty of videos out there of him slurring and stumbling on his words. Our audience have seen it many, many times. So trust me, it's out there. But you're right. Substantively, he's digging in on, Tulsi, the Ukraine war is lost. And we're just not being honest about it in the media, and certainly not from the White House. We're pouring more and more. It's good money after bad. It's not that we don't have sympathy for the Ukrainian people. It's just at some point you've got to realize when you've lost, and then you have to cut those losses. And this president, he could take that lesson personally, and he could take that lesson when it comes to Ukraine. But boy, he went a different way when NATO came to town this week. Here he is at the summit on Tuesday. Stop 40.
Before this war, Putin thought NATO would break. Today, NATO is stronger than it's ever been in its history. When this senseless war began, Ukraine was a free country. Today, it is still a free country. And the war will end with Ukraine remaining a free and independent country. Russia will not prevail. Ukraine will prevail.
What did you make of it?
There's two major points here. Number one is President Biden simply making this statement that Ukraine will prevail, Russia will not prevail, does not make it so. He is being dishonest with the American people and being dishonest with the people of Ukraine who he claims to care about. This war will continue to go on as a war of attrition. Many, many more Ukrainians will needlessly be killed in a war that you and I and many others have known from the very beginning would only end with a negotiated treaty. There are so many reasons why this is the case. They have been proved out throughout the almost 2 years now that this war has been waged. Russia has a strong military industrial complex. They have many, many more troops than Ukraine will ever be able to muster. And they are already running out of able-bodied men who are willing to go and fight. And they're essentially kidnapping men off the streets now and forcing them to fight and making it so that those who fled Ukraine because they didn't want to fight in this war are being forced to come back into the country. Russia has already rebuilt and reconstituted their military to a point where they are stronger now, both in hardware and in manpower, than they were when they started this war, when they invaded Ukraine, which obviously was wrong, but this is the reality that we are facing. So for President Biden to say this, to make this statement, promising our taxpayer dollars, as we know, some NATO allies are looking at sending in their troops, which, if anything happened to a single one of their troops, would invoke Article 5 and force us to get involved. He's being dishonest with the American people about the cost, both of our taxpayer dollars and our security. The longer this goes on, the more it continues to escalate, as President Biden is escalating this proxy war, which ultimately is about regime change in Russia. The closer we get to nuclear Armageddon, and we are already closer than we ever have been before. The other point that I think is really important to make here is, as you said, Megan, we do care about the people of Ukraine and their plight and the destruction and the loss that they are experiencing. Those who really care about the people of Ukraine, if President Biden really cared, he would have led those negotiations to end this war a long time ago. We have the leverage to be able to do it. Lastly, he talks about Ukraine is free and will remain free. What does that freedom look like? Well, in a free Ukraine under President Zelensky, he has dismantled, disbarred, and imprisoned any major political opposition individuals or political parties. Anytime they stand up and start to challenge him, he uses his Department of Justice to ban their existence and to seize their assets. He just did it again recently, a few weeks ago. He has taken total control of all of the media in Ukraine. It is now a government-controlled media and government-controlled messaging. He has gone after, I think, is the second largest church in Ukraine and banned them and shut them down. He has canceled elections so that anyone who wanted to challenge him and his leadership and the decisions that he's making does not even have the opportunity to do so. So how can you say this is a free country? And secondly, we look at, well, how does that apply to, why should we care Why should we care about what Zelensky is doing there when we have our own president saying that we are defending Ukraine's democracy and we're defending Ukraine's freedom? Well, if that's what he thinks is freedom and democracy, we got to pay really close attention to what they are doing here at home and how willing they may be to claim a state of war and martial law and cancel our own elections and defy our own constitution, because this is what freedom is to President Biden and his administration.
You know, one of the claims that Joe Biden made at that debate that, again, we didn't really get to because we were all slack-jawed at the actual condition of our president was he continued to raise the blowback that he orchestrated against Russia and said, I shut Putin down. I'm the guy who shut Putin down. And you couldn't help, he said this in the Stephanopoulos and he said in the debate too, and you couldn't help but think, wait a minute, because first of all, you created a condition in which it was provocative for
Yes.
Putin, and that he believed, based on your own words, which we don't know whether you knew you uttered or not, about, well, if it's a minor incursion, that he could do this and get away with it. He saw what happened with Afghanistan and the disastrous withdrawal and how weakened the United States was. And then he acted. And then it is true that we led a worldwide effort to impose sanctions on Russia. And Joe Biden said, let's wait to see how he is in 18 months. Wait to see how Putin is in 18 months after all my sanctions. Well, the reports are, and I confess I haven't been following it that closely. I'm sure you have because you've been talking about it a lot. Their economy is doing fine. They suffered a bit, but they've made up a lot of the revenue and the war funding that they've been doing. And they are just trading with different partners now and not the Europeans. And Putin seems like he's doing, maybe not spectacularly, but fine. And certainly hasn't been brought to his knees by anything we've done.
It's a fact. It's a fact. The fact that Joe Biden is gloating about the expansion of NATO, really what he is gloating about is the fact that he has made us, the American people, and the world far less safe, because by doing so knowingly, and history tells us this is true, the red line has always been around, for Russia, has always been around how they view an expansion of NATO encroaching around their borders as a red line and as an existential threat to their security. It's been very clear since before Putin was ever even in power, and it still remains true today. We look at how we would feel if we were in a similar situation. We would also be concerned about such an existential threat. So the fact that even before Putin invaded Ukraine, you had Kamala Harris once again out there in a very provocative way, promising that Ukraine would become a member of NATO. Tony Blinken recently, again, promised Ukraine will become a member of NATO. So where does this road lead? It leads to one that is more dangerous than many people can even imagine, and one that President Biden is lying to the American people about. You hear all of this bluster as he's trying to project strength, but what he's actually doing is putting the interest of the military-industrial complex and his own facade of bravado and power ahead of our own safety and security and our ability to even think about having a world to live in tomorrow. No one talks about nuclear war these days, which should be a red flag to everyone, given we are closer to the brink of nuclear war than ever before. And President Putin has made no bones about the fact that they are running nuclear armament drills and that their laws have been changed to say if we face an existential threat, we are authorized to use nuclear weapons. What that would kick off in the world is unimaginable when we think about the last 20 years of war we've seen in Afghanistan and Iraq. We look at the cost of war, the cause of the blast itself, children's skin melting off in the streets. You have the nuclear winter that follows for anyone who survives that initial blast. Ronald Reagan was 100% correct and understood the seriousness of this when he said a nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought. We should heed those words very carefully now, because quite literally, the very future of humanity and this planet are what is at stake because of what Joe Biden has done.